Hello and welcome to our first video in the series on the meaning and symbolism of the cards. Today we're going to talk about the Fool card, and I am super excited to be here. And I have to say, I do feel a little bit like the Fool in that I'm putting myself out there, stepping off the cliff, and we'll see what happens. So let's get started. I know you're here to listen to me speak about the Fool card. But before I start, I just want to show you two things. I've got a fabulous journal called Connect with Your Deck. And there is a free course that goes with this journal. All the links are down in the comments for this video. And the other thing I want to show you, this colouring book has all of the notes for the symbolism for the entire 78 card Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So if you enjoy my talk today about the cards, there is also a link to pick up the colouring book that's down in the comments. So let's get started. I am just going to share my screen. Now, there we go, share, desktop, share. Hopefully this is going to work. It is working. Oh, I love it when technology works. And here we go with the slides. Now we need them up here and we want to press there. Beautiful. The Fool from the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, inspiration, symbolism, upright and reversed meanings, and a few other things thrown in as well. You know what I'm like when I chat away about the cards. So the first thing I thought was you might like to, we talked about the free course. Don't forget to click, the links are down below, below the video. So make sure you click down there because the link is there to join my free course. So that's just a reminder more for me to make sure that I tell you to go and click. So I thought you might like to know a little bit about me before we get started. I used to be a psychologist. In fact, I was a psychologist for 13 years and I worked in Relate in England and also for Relationships Australia. And I specialised in women's family violence. And I found that I really struggled with the work, especially in terms of being therapeutically correct. I found that spirit would talk to me through the sessions, and I found it very difficult to sit back and not give people the messages that were coming through to me. So it eventually became clear to me that I needed to do something about that. And if you want to read more about me, I've got a whole page about my experiences on my website, elizabethroebuckjones.com. But to cut a long story short, I decided that I needed to pursue my connection with spirit, so I am now a clairvoyant. And I also have this burning passion with the tarot, which I absolutely love. I am available both to read the tarot for you in readings, specialising in relationships. And of course, I bring in all my psychology skills with that. And also, I teach the tarot through journaling, which I'm super excited about. So, and I'm just loving it. I just love it. Best decision I ever made to pursue my dream and be part of the spiritual world. So that's me. What are we going to talk about today? So we're going to have a short history of the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot. Very, very short, potted history. I would love to do a deeper history with you, and I'm currently doing some readings about the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot and what happened in that 6 months when it was developed. And there is just some extraordinary stories that parallel with many of the challenges that we have online, which I thought were about being online, but you know, they're really about life and working with people. So fascinating stuff. We're going to talk about the colour variants of the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot. I have got permission to use the US Games versions of the tarot, and also these images have been in the public domain for 100 years or more, and so they are part of it's what we call their copyrightless, or they're part of the public domain, so I can use them. And I want to talk to you about those colour variants because I really don't feel I can talk to you about the symbolism and meaning of the card without talking about colour. And the colours do vary a little bit, so I'll be talking about that. I'll be talking about upright and reversed meanings. I'll be talking about the elemental, zodiac and planetary correspondences. And of course, these are based on the Golden Dawn. Pamela Colman Smith and Arthur Waite were members of the Golden Dawn, and they have based their tarot deck on the Golden Dawn correspondences. So whilst I hear of other people giving them other correspondences, strictly that's not correct. They were given those correspondences quite overtly. So I'll be talking about that in terms of the full card. I'll be talking about the placement of the full card in the deck, numerology, Hebrew symbolism and all of that sort of significance, or doing my best to. And I'll also be talking about the colour symbolism and symbolism of the card in detail. So that's our talk for today. So a little bit about the history. So Pamela Colman Smith and Arthur Waite, well, Arthur Waite developed this, like what I'd call the skeleton of the card, and Pamela Colman Smith created that into a series of images. And they basically did a pre-sale of the cards. They were released in 1909. I think they advertised in a magazine. The first cards they released, they had problems with, and subsequent printing. So it's been fascinating to read about, and fascinating in terms of even just this idea of having a pre-sale, which is something we talk about online, and it's a very old idea. The cards were an instant hit and were originally known as the Rider-Waite Tarot, and nobody thought about Pamela Colman Smith because after all she is a woman, but in later years we have acknowledged her and the fact that really it is her images that have made the deck come alive. She really has done an absolutely fabulous job. So that's my little bit of history, and of course if this is something you'd like to know more about, please let me know in the comments and I will have a look at whether I can put together a video that goes into deeper detail about the history of the card. So we're going to talk about the colour variations in the Rider-Waite Smith deck. And there are basically 4 main US games decks that I've come across. Now there may be more, but these are the 4 main ones that seem to come past me a lot. And the first one is the authorized deck. Now, this is the deck that I'm going to be using when I talk about color symbolism. The main reason I'm doing that is because it is a deck with very clear coloring. And it's the main deck that's available sort of across the world. There's the original deck that was released to sort of commemorate the deck and try and release something that was more in keeping with what was originally released back in 1909, 1910. But it's still, you know, modern printing. So it's hard to know in terms of colour. Then there's the universal deck, which was coloured by Mary Hanson Roberts. And then the Radiant deck, which was coloured by Virginia Jess Hotchkiss. And these 2 decks, the last 2, the Universal and the Radiant, were commissioned by US Games to just give the deck a breath of life in terms of colour. They wanted to do something different. So they're the decks. You can see with the full card, there's not a lot of variation in colour. There is a little bit of variation in intensity, but I've included this because as we work our way through the cards, some of the cards, the colouring is quite different. So just letting you know, I'm sticking with the authorised deck because I just don't feel that I can talk to you about colour without, about symbolism without talking about colour. All right, so let's talk about upright and reversed meanings. So some people read reversed cards, other people don't. In talking about reversed cards, I'm talking about those cards that when you shuffle the deck and you lay out your spread, that appear upside down. And some people read them as having separate meanings. Other people turn them up the right way, which I'm guilty of doing, and read the card then based on the upright meaning and the cards that surround the card, if that makes sense. Some people, I've put some other examples of other interpretations of upright cards. And so I'm going to give you the meaning for both. I tend to learn the reverse meaning more as an alternative meaning when I'm looking at the other cards surrounding the card. So if we're thinking about the upright meaning, we're looking at stepping out into life with the innocence of a child, having faith in yourself, trusting in new beginnings, having the trust to end something old in your life and begin something new. If we look at the reversed meaning, we're looking at slow down, be cautious. Instead of trusting with innocence, it's better to step back, look before you leap, and when you slow down, you give yourself this opportunity to assess all the possibilities and protect yourself, or, you know, put those boundaries in place that you need to have in place in life. So this idea of gathering more information before you take a risk. Now, of course, you can use both of those meanings, whether the card is upright or reversed. It really doesn't matter. Something I should mention is in his pictorial guide to the tarot, Arthur Waite does talk about reversed meanings. So he is aware that cards do this sort of thing, and he's talked about both options in terms of reading. It's really up to you how you read the cards, the same as you may have just listened to my interpretation and have much more or less to add or not agree with me at all. You'll find as you move through reading different books and online and talking to people, everybody has a different interpretation of the card, and there's no right or wrong. It's really what is important to you. So let's look at the correspondences. So it is the element of air is the correspondence for the Fool, and the ruling planet of Uranus or Uranus, however you decide to pronounce it. So the major arcana is often talked about as being a card of spirit, and that's because the major arcana talks about things inside you, deeper, long-term aspects of self, whereas your minor arcana talk about daily happenings. So don't be confused when people talk about the major arcana as representing spirit. There are also golden dawn correspondences, and for this particular card, the correspondence is air. Now, the element air is attributed to this idea of mental energy, being quick moving, thinking about the swords cards, which are the element air. And as you can see, the Fool is traveling along the road, and you can see his hair's being blown back and his tunic's being blown back. The sleeves are full of air, and that's all reflective of this idea of the card being associated with the element of air. The planetary correspondence, and there's a lot of debate about this online, and as I talk about the symbolism, you will get a sense of this, that there's a lot of solar or sun correspondences or symbolism in the card, but the Golden Dawn correspondence for the Fool card is Uranus. And so Uranus is a planet of individuality, spontaneity, disruption, change, and it's an outer planet. So it impacts the personal planets. And if you know a little bit about astrology, you'll know that there are those 6 personal planets that impact us on a daily basis. And then there's the outer planets, which have more long-lasting effects. So this is a planet that emphasizes creative inspiration. So it emphasizes this Fool's message of stepping into your power and going where your instinct leads you. So that extra layer of meaning from those correspondences. And you can see I've got the symbol for air and also the symbol for the planet Uranus. So let's look at the placement of the card in the deck. So the traditional placement for the Fool card is at the beginning of the deck, but you need to remember that the original cards developed back in 1490. And in 1490, the Fool had a very different meaning and symbolism than what he does now. So in some of the older decks, there's pictures of the Fool with his pants down, his genitals hanging out, doing really stupid things. And it was this idea of being an idiot. And so the name Fool has stayed, but as our way of life has changed and our understanding of the tarot and how we use the tarot has changed from being a parlor, just sort of postcards and a parlor game, to actually cards of divination, that the Fool's meaning has become more sophisticated. We've kept this traditional name, the Fool, but the meaning is very different, and that's where people get very confused. So there's a traditional placement at the beginning of the deck, and there's reasons for that. Now, not all decks have the Fool at the beginning of the deck, and there is reasoning behind each placement, whether it's in the middle of the deck or at the end of the deck. But for the Rider-Waite system, I'm going to talk to you about the reasoning for the Fool being at the beginning of the deck. So in the 0, Fool's not number 1, it's 0. The 0 is representative in numerology of limitless potentials. So it's a circle. This idea of beginning without end, you know, nothing is impossible. The card is also attributed to Aleph in the Hebrew symbolism, which is the first letter of the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Now, somewhere along the line, the tarot got attributed to Hebrew alphabet symbolism. Why, when, or how that happened, nobody knows, but it is part of the tradition of learning the cards. And if you go into the deeper symbolism of the Kabbalah, the Hebrew symbolism is a big part of that. So Aleph represents this profoundly mystical letter, and I do apologize if my explanation is very cumbersome because I've never learnt Hebrew before. But from my reading, my understanding is it represents infinite energy. It represents all that is and is not. It's like this omnipresent idea of God, that there's no beginning, there's no end, it just is, and it's fabulous and full of energy and really represents the creation of everything. So when Aleph is projected into existence, it becomes what's called a yod, or all my tarot friends call it a yod, and I've been corrected and told it's pronounced yod or yud. But it is important that you know about these because they're a little symbolism, like a little teardrop, and they represent sort of Aleph coming into being. The Hebrew alphabet is very based on sound, and so the yod is like the Aleph coming into sound. And it's important that you know about the yods because it's this idea of coming into being, and the yods are placed all the way through the deck, and they're not on this particular card, but they are on other cards. And so as we work our way through doing this video series, I will bring you back to the yods. So the Fool's at the beginning of the deck to represent this beginning of spiritualism and spiritual ideas. However, the Fool can be placed anywhere in the deck, and we will talk about other placements, but one that comes to mind is Aleister Crowley and his Thoth Tarot, where he has placed the Fool at the end of the deck, and he has all of his reasoning for that. So it doesn't really matter where it's placed in the deck. It has the same meaning. It's just for the Golden Dawn and Arthur Waite and Pamela Colman-Smith, they have placed the Fool at the beginning of the deck. If any of you know sort of more about this, please put comments for me to answer at the bottom of this video recording, and I'll come in and read them and we can all learn together. But please be kind to me because obviously I'm self-taught with a lot of reading, and we all have different opinions, and there is no right or wrong in the tarot. Just be very mindful of that as you read, you need to make up your own mind about what is important to you and what you think are the intended meanings and what's not. All right, so let's start to look at the colour symbolism. So there are 3 colours that I think are really important for you to be aware of in the tarot. And as I said, there are some colour variants, but with the Fool card, if you're looking at Rider-Waite-Smith, it's pretty standard that red, yellow and white are the 3 main colours. So let's look at red symbolism. So red is fire, blood, passion, pleasure, vibrance, and love. So we're looking at, for example, the red feather on the Fool's hat. And you can see here in the Sun card is the same symbol. And this is the idea of showing vitality, strength, passion, vibrance, potential, and is reminiscent of this idea of the flame of life. And on the card, on the Sun card, the child has the red feather and it has exactly the same meaning. And it's interesting that you've got the Sun towards the end of the deck and the Fool at the beginning, and this idea of maintaining this childlike passion of life. The red sleeves are like the wings of passion. And remember, we talked about this airiness and the fact that the sleeves are inflated, which is about, you know, the wind blowing and, you know, being ready to launch yourself into the world. On the card, there are also these round circles called starbursts. And the starbursts, I'll talk about those when we talk about the yellow symbolism, but on them are these red spokes. And these red spokes are symbolic of the Wheel of Fortune, or being on a journey of life and coming into yourself. So starting off, you're in, you know, you've got this innocence of a child and or this idea of leaving all the baggage behind. And as you can see, his knapsack's behind him, leaving all your baggage behind, launching yourself off into the world without any preconceived idea. And I will talk to you some more about the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac as we progress through. But this idea of them being in cloud and coming into themselves. Now, on the lower right-hand corner of the Fool's jacket, you can see a little symbol, and it's a shin. And this shin is representative of flames. So it's reminiscent of this idea of the flames of passion, which are on the jacket. I hope you can see my little arrow pointing. And these are reminiscent of the tree of life, which is behind the man on the Fool card. And you can see the flames that are there. Eliphas Levi was a very accomplished occultist, and Arthur Waite actually translated many of his books, and his books really influenced the Golden Dawn system. So Eliphas Levi, in his writings, placed the Fool between judgment and the world and called it Shin. Unlike Arthur Waite, who placed the Fool card at the beginning of the deck as per the Golden Dawn system and called it Aleph, signifying the beginning of the Hebrew alphabet and the beginning of the deck rather than at the end of the deck. And it's believed that that little shin is like in deference to him. So it's just another little symbol on the card that is symbolic of the card's meaning. So there's also a heart over the heart of the Fool, which is again symbolic of passion, and it's reminiscent of these flames that are on the Fool's tunic, reminiscent of this, you know, this idea of passion and launching yourself out into the world. So the next colour we're going to talk about is yellow. So I want you to think creativity, sunlight, happiness, protection, intellect, positivity, and clarity. Now, it's interesting, there is a lot of sun symbolism on this card, and yet the Golden Dawn attribution is Uranus or Uranus. It's interesting, if you go online and you go sort of on your travels reading about the full card, you'll see that there's an awful lot of discussion about this solar symbolism and whether the card really should have been attributed to the sun. And the solar symbolism is really important for you to know because it just makes the card come alive. So if you think about the yellow sky, why is the sky yellow? Well, it goes back to that story of Icarus and his wax wings, and he just got too daring and he flew too close to the sun and his wings melted and he fell. So this idea of having that daring, having that sense of putting your baggage behind you, stepping out in the world, but not being too daring that you put yourself in danger. So that's why the yellow sun, being inspired and creative and passionate, but being careful you don't go too close to the sun. He's got yellow boots on. So again, this is about letting your head and your heart guide the way, being passionate, and again, not too reckless. Yellow hair is about passion, and as you can see, it's blowing back in the breeze. We talked about that earlier. And this idea of listening to yourself. The yellow circles represent solar bursts of positivity and clarity and linked to the solar imagery all over the card. All right, let's talk about white. So we've got a white sun, a white tunic, a white dog, and a white rose. What does that mean? And I hope the card's really coming alive for you now. So the white sun is about naivety or completion or this idea of cleansing the mind. And the white sun is in reference to this white light of Kether. And Kether is a Hebrew symbol of the pure white light of God coming from the tree of life. So this idea of coming back to where all life begins, purity of thought, purity of spirit. The white dog. Now you can see the white dog, it's loyalty and faithfulness. And the dog is with purity of spirit, warning the fool. Just be careful, just be careful. I know you feel like you're on top of the world, but just be careful. There's a cliff right there. And of course, if you think about this theme of faithfulness, how much faith do you have in yourself? And of course, the fool has the white tunic on underneath his jacket. And that's about innocence, purity, faith in yourself, clarity, cleansing. All of those sorts of images come through. And of course, the white rose, again, white roses can be symbolic of death, which I'm not quite sure that that's the symbol here. It's more about purity and innocence of spirit. He's sort of holding the white rose out with this absolute abandonment of life. All right, so let's have a look at the other symbolism that's in the card. So on his head, there's some discussion that maybe this is a cap. From colouring in the card and looking at it really closely and expanding it on my mobile phone and doing all that, I'm convinced it's a wreath. And wreaths have this symbolism of triumph of spirit in the world, being able to rise above all the things that hold us back. The wreath is also symbolic of the sun god of Apollo, again, this sun symbolism, which represents victory in life. The outward display of the laurel wreath also shows inner strength and this ability to overcome negative influences in your life. So I'm convinced it's a wreath on his head, and maybe next time I'll colour him in, I'll put a little bit of yellow hair on top so it really looks like a circlet on the top of his head. The 7 pearls on his belt represent the 7 chakras, which are the energy fields that become unlocked in your body with the experience of life. Of course, the cliff is this symbol of being in the moment without a care. The fool doesn't care if he steps off the cliff. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. And he's certainly not worried about what happens next. The mountains represent our spiritual journey. Now, looking at the bag on his on the staff on his shoulder. So the staff points the way, you know, it's pointing him, you know, on the way over the cliff. Take that leap of faith. And the bag over his shoulder represents his baggage behind him. He's carrying it with him, but it's not bothering him. And if we think about the symbolism of the next card, the magician card, the magician opens the bag onto his table is sort of the story that's told in the Fool's Journey through the Major Arcana. And the magician opens the bag, and on the table is the cup, the sword, the wand, and the pentacle. He has everything that he needs to move forward in this world. And so there's this idea of him carrying with him just what he needs and no more. On the Fool's Bundle, there's a little symbol, and it's really hard to see what it is. I think it's an eagle representing knowledge, passion, energy, airiness, you know, the flying eagle. But some people do say that it's a symbol of a shell, which symbolizes new life. So that's it. Thank you so much for listening to me speak today about the Fool card. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I have got my Connect with Your Deck free course available. Just click the link at the bottom of the video, which will have all of the links that you need to join my free course, have a look at my journals, and see some more of how I work out there in social media land. Have fun, everybody. It's been wonderful speaking to you, and I will be back next week with the magician. So make sure that you follow my channel so that you can find my videos again. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.